This is very simple. How many people in the world are suffering from Electra complex? How many people are suffering from, mother complex, father complex, daddy issue, this issue, that issue, Oedipus complex, blah, blah complex? All these complexes are there. All the neuroses are there. Now you tell me all this. And then you also know half the problem is because of conditioning. If conditioning is the problem for you, and then how can you resolve it? So you don't need a guru. You resolve your garbage yourself. You deal with your daddy issue by hugging a pillow at night and crying. The daddy issue becomes a bloody marriage issue. Then you can't have a relationship. You can't experience intimacy. You can't flower. You know what I'm saying? Because the conditionings are there at the back that are dealing. So the gurus are trained to remove these conditionings. The conditionings that the gurus talk about was then changed to Pavlov and the dog, Ivan Pavlov, he and his dog. And then he realized that by ringing the bell, the behavioral science, by ringing the bell, the dog salivated or whatever, operant conditioning, and then Skinner's conditioning, B.S. Skinner. And then he was talking about conditioning by reward and punishment. The real conditioning is your fear. And because of your fear, you are exhibiting all kind of neuroses. Even if I say hello, someone can say like, yeah, ooh, yeah. I would just say hello, So even at that level, you need a guru. Of course, the psychologists propagated the idea that the gurus are bad because there was a direct conflict of interest. Psychology wanted to sell something and the gurus are free. So Freud was very afraid that he will be found out because he was taking from the gurus. And all these guys, like this bloody Carl Jung, these Americans can't even say Carl Jung, they'll say Carl Jung. Bloody hell, learn to say his name, man. He's a Swiss guy. No Jung there, it's Jung. Huh? This Carl Jung, he came to India about 10 to 15 times. Guru is not important. And he met gurus every time he came. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that Carl Jung does not know Sanskrit, doesn't go through anything, but he has an opinion. He has got a book on chakra. He wrote an introduction in The I Ching by Richard Wilhelm. Carl Jung wrote an introduction. He does not know Chinese. He's never been to China. He doesn't understand anything, but he has an opinion. Now, may I ask you, you don't need a guru because, these are important people. You don't need a guru. You listen to this crap. You listen to this and you believe that you don't need a guru. You know everything, by your birth, you know everything. I know, okay, this whole talk on gurus and, how you don't need a guru and what do you need? You need YouTube. And this is this new, psychology was fighting against gurus. Because they take the guru's material and then they pretend it to be theirs. The whole thing that Freud is talking, the whole thing is coming from Schopenhauer, the libido. And then he is talking about a libido. This whole thing is coming from the streets of Chennai. Every child in Chennai will know what is a libido. For the Western world, it's institutionalized and kept sacred and secret, and you got to earn your PhD. But a freaking street kid in Chennai will tell you what is libido. Street kid in Chennai will tell you, the anal retentive disorder. They will say, in North India also, they will say, what your ass is blocked by fat or what? Anal retentive disorder. So simple, one word only. Why are you misbehaving like this? So we all know, So, but of course, Freud never left his home. He never left his bathroom. From there, he was like, blah, 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 blah. You know the stories that they tell you. They will talk nonsense until the money is exhausted. Now is a very danger point for them.
The Western countries have created copyright, intellectual property rights, patent rights, only to protect their own rights. It doesn't protect the gurus. The information of the gurus are clearly stolen and repackaged as psychology. You can see how much the Western people were following spiritualism at the time of the Transcendental Society, of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne. Spiritualism was a very important culture of the US and of thinking Europe. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a deep admirer of the Bhagavad Gita, which he referenced frequently in his journals. He wrote, "I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spoke to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us." Henry David Thoreau claimed himself to be a yogi and was reading the Bhagavad Gita every day. He wrote, "In the morning, I bathe my intellect in the stupendous and cosmological philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, in comparison with which our modern world and its literature seem puny and trivial." He also said, "Whenever I have read any part of the Vedas, I have felt that some unearthly and unknown light illuminated me. In the great teaching of the Vedas, there is no touch of the sectarianism. It is of ages, climes, and nationalities, and is the royal road for the attainment of the great knowledge." This was hijacked by the Lilliputians in the name of science and repackaged as psychology and sociology. Germany invested in researching on these ancient spiritual systems to modernize itself. This was why they were studying the Bhagavad Gita, which was translated very early in Germany and in France. One first complete version was translated and published by Friedrich Meyer in 1802, then another one in 1823 by August Wilhelm von Schlegel. The missionaries based in Kerala, such as Hermann Guntert from the Basel Mission, also took all the mathematical concepts back to Germany. The Basel Mission was a Swiss-German network founded in 1815. The missionaries in Kerala collected local texts and shipped manuscripts to Basel and other German-speaking academic centers. This is how calculus and many other Indian concepts were taken to Germany. The Bhagavad Gita was first published in France in 1787, translated by Jean-Pierre Parot. The first direct translation Sanskrit to French was produced and published by Jean-Denis Lanjuinet in 1832. Abraham Hyacinthe Anquetil-Duperron was a French scholar and pioneer, who as early as the mid-1700s recognized the importance of studying Indian traditional sacred texts. Duperron studied the Yoga Vasistha, which prompted other Europeans to look into Indian philosophy, especially to try to understand the ideology that is in the Bhagavad Gita. While he did not produce a standalone French translation of the Bhagavad Gita, he engaged with the text through his broader work on Indian scriptures. His work introduced European intellectuals to the core philosophical concepts of Vedanta, directly influencing thinkers like Schopenhauer long before the Bhagavad Gita became widely known in France. Even earlier, Gaston Laurent Coeur-Doux, who was a French Jesuit missionary in South India, demonstrated the relationship between Sanskrit and European languages in a 1767 memoir, decades before Sir William Jones. He can be considered the first philologist, way before Max Muller. Coeur-Doux compiled a Telugu-French Sanskrit dictionary that is still authoritative. Anquetil-Duperron was an admirer and correspondent of Gaston Laurent Coeur-Doux, walking all the way from Calcutta to Pondicherry to meet him. All this information of the gurus got then translated as linguistics, psychology, sociology, etc., and was then sold in the USA by the Lilliputians as the scientific representation of thinking. This was further enhanced in France by Jacques Derrida and Jacques Lacan. Freud got his information by analyzing Schopenhauer's reflection on eros, translating them into a simplistic biological reasoning. This was later rehashed by Carl Jung. Through his association with Friedrich Eckstein, a theosophist who co-founded the Vienna Theosophical Society and who was a close associate of Karl Kellner, Freud was directly exposed to Eastern yogic and tantric frameworks being adapted for Western circles. Karl Kellner, an Austrian chemist and inventor, He immersed himself in yoga and tantric practices during his travel through Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Eckstein was also actively practicing yoga, which Freud himself referenced. Freud also drew from Franz Bopp, who was studying the practical aspects of the mind and hypnosis from the tantrics of his time. This shows the several layers from which Freud quietly took Eastern ideas for his own theories. While these men explored these practices experientially, Freud extracted their psychological insights, reframed them in biological terms, and wove them into his psychoanalytic theory, all without acknowledging the spiritual roots he was drawing from. Freud, with his libido and his own interpretation of the idea of chakra as 5 phases, used his nephew Edward Bernays to spread these false ideas in the US. Carl Jung, despite not having directly studied from a traditional master, not having the expertise, not knowing any Sanskrit, nonetheless spoke on chakras and kundalini in a seminar in 1932. He made no reference to Sir John Woodruff, whose earlier book, The Serpent Power, had already addressed the chakras from a traditional standpoint. Jung also didn't mention Mircea Eliade, whom he begged in Paris to share his insights on Tantra and the chakra system. This is how Jung actually wrote his book on chakras, by taking from Mircea Eliade's information. Jung was also friend with Richard Wilhelm, the translator of the I Ching. Yet, despite never having lived in China or studied traditional Chinese philosophy, Jung contributed to the foreword to Wilhelm's translation. These are good reasons to say that Carl Jung wanted to appropriate Hinduism and other traditional Eastern traditions for his economical agenda. These guys appropriated from yoga and the yogic ideology, Tantra, etc., for their economical and political advantage.